Welcome to CB Ministries Church Security Through Prevention podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Blevins. Something that came out of last week's podcast was a suggestion by Todd regarding mistakes made and lessons learned. I'm really excited about this, and as I've reached out to several security leaders to see about if they'd be willing to take some time and share some of those things, it just confirms what I've been told at our seminars as well, that people out there are really wanting to know these things so that they can help form and develop their own teams and their policies and procedures or whatever the case is. This is far bigger than I thought it was going to be, so it looks like it's going to be an ongoing, off and on series for a while. If you are a security leader and you have some of those stories and best practices that you would like to share, contact me so we can get that scheduled and get a recording of you sharing those things for others. For the first one, Vince Harrison has stepped up to share some of his thoughts from over 20 years of church security experience. As usual, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. We are really looking forward to a new year of seminars. And if you would like an email with information on hosting a seminar, just send me an email request and I'll get that out to you. So let's kick off this new series and spend some time hearing from Vince. Vince, welcome to the Church Security Through Prevention podcast. And good morning. And as we've talked about, kind of offline a little bit, this is just kind of a special podcast of a bunch of people, leaders, church security leaders, on lessons learned from maybe mistakes that have been made, that you know of or that has happened in your church or anything like that, that hopefully it will spill over into other people to help other people, to be able to learn from. It's always easier to learn from somebody else's mistakes than to make them ourselves,
Sure.
right?
Absolutely.
So how are things going in New Mexico for you?
No, things are good. We had a pretty good snowstorm, which probably hit you guys in the last 24 hours. And it's nice to wake up and see those sandias with the white caps and the cold weather. We don't get a lot of snow in town, but we do get it in the ski areas up in the mountains. So
Yeah.
I know Colorado's full of what do they call it? The 1414s over there?
Yeah, the 14ers. Yeah. Yeah, and it does make for a beautiful sight. That's for sure.
Good stuff.
Yeah, we've got it right now. It's snowing lightly and everything's at least white.
Hey, Christmas time, you couldn't be asking more than that, right?
That's right. Yeah, especially living here in God's country.
Yeah, I'm into that. My sister lives in Different Springs, and I know they love it. Sure has been an odd year though, hasn't it?
Oh my gosh, yes. Yep. It really has on so many levels.
Awesome.
It was good that you guys were able to do your security conference back in October, that still was able to go with everything else going on. That was encouraging.
Yeah, it was a much smaller venue than we usually have, but it was worth it. A lot of the churches that attended had a lot of questions. You can always gauge your training by the questions people have after, so, and I appreciate you coming to it. It was great to have you guys.
Oh yeah, it was my pleasure, and it was great to see it, and look forward to hopefully a much better one this next year, much better attended. I mean, the seminar was great, but maybe a much better attended seminar, for this next year.
Sure.
So what are some of those lessons or mistakes that have been made and lessons that you've learned through that process?
Wow. Well, it's been a long, a little bit of history. It's like for me at a Calvary Church here in Albuquerque. I started volunteering in '96. I was working the streets as a police officer, and my wife and I just became believers, and we're trying to plug in. And I tried the kids ministry for a little bit, and it didn't work out too well. I was leaving more stressed than I came into the church, and I figured there's got to be another place to serve. So anyhow, I ended up starting with what they called was a security ministry, and there were about 6 to 8 guys who would walk around and drink coffee and collect the money after the end of the services, and that was pretty much it. They didn't do much else other than that. The church was much smaller then. So they had asked me if I could put on some training, knowing I was a law enforcement officer. So anyways, it expanded into about 8 months later, they asked me to take over the ministry, the assistant pastor. And I said, sure, what are the expectations? But I want a budget. And I want to be able to get things, radios, and I want to be able to make sure the guys are identified with some type of shirts or markings, badges and stuff. So anyways, it took off from there. And now we have a well-established ministry. Here we are 24 years later. So I was the volunteer coordinator for 18 years here at Calvary Albuquerque, and I came on staff in 2015. So 5 years ago, I became a staff member when they started the school and expanded the campuses. So it's been a blessing for sure. So I can tell you one of the talk about lessons learned was from going from a volunteer servant to a staff member was an eye opener. You know, in churches, you know, Daniel, at your church, when it comes to budgets, one of the things is security is not. I know that on the last faith-based security network, Sheepdog Coffee, one of the topics was budgets, and what is it? I think less than 1 or 2% of that church's entire budget is involved in security.
Yeah, it really is the case. We are blessed at our church that they've taken it really seriously and embraced it as the ministry that it is and the necessity that it is. But you're absolutely right. That's not always the case for most churches.
So for me, one of the biggest things is being able to convince. And so over the years, I had the budget was given, I think it was $2,000 back in the late 90s. And, now my budget is obviously much, much larger, but the expectancy of the pastor you've got to be able to sell this to them, that it's important, that security and safety are important to the church, whether it's medical emergencies or active shooter training or emergency alert system. You've got to be able to produce and justify the means and the expenditures. So for me, it was over the years learning that it is a church. You are dealing with people's tithe money, so being very frugal is one of the biggest things that I learned. And just because money's approved in a budget doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be there to spend. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And for me, that was because coming from law enforcement, I retired in 2009 from the Albuquerque Police Department. The budget's there. You got $1 million to spend on revising your SWAT gear. You spend that $1 million by the end of the year, or you lose it in church budgets and in finance. You may have that money, but it doesn't mean you're going to spend it. So it just depends on the needs of the church, and you have to have the same vision as a pastor. So that's what I would encourage people: is make sure you have the ear of the lead pastor, and that you work hand in hand with them at what the vision of the church is. That's one of the things that I learned, and that I can tell people that's really important to have, if that's what you're planning on doing.
And then when you were starting back in the late 90s, there really wasn't much for resources or people for you to be able to even glean from to get ideas or resources or anything. So you were kind of coming in it at ground zero on your own, weren't you?
Exactly. And you with the training you do with your company, with CV Ministries, it's so important that people understand that you have to be engaged with training up your folks. You have to be engaged with whether it's active shooter response or verbal de-escalation, use of force. All these nowadays are much different than it was back in the day when I first started. Our use of force policy was our use of force continuum. You ask, you tell, and you make. And now it's you've really got to avoid that any use of force at all in any ministry. So for me, what I ended up doing is I implemented a lot of the law enforcement tactics into the church security realm. About 10 years into it, one of the lessons learned also was developing safety ministry versus security ministry. And that was obviously for liability purposes. So the longer you're into it, one of the things that I learned was making sure you're in communication, and in very cohesive communication with with your insurance company. And for us, we have Brotherhood Mutual. I know you talk about them a lot in your podcast, as well as Carl does with Faith-Based Security Network. They are the name in the industry, and they know what they're doing. The first time I spoke to them was probably 2003, 2004. I had inquired about getting security protection for liability for use of force and deadly force situations, and they didn't have it for security guards in churches for armed security. One of the other things that had come up with Carrie Bueller with Brotherhood Mutual was talking about medical protection, providing medical insurance for the volunteers who are providing medical assistance in emergencies. So those are some of the core things that ended up coming to fruition over a few years after that. So probably in 2015 or so is when we ended up implementing, or Brotherhood Mutual ended up implementing the policies for armed security guard carry and protecting the nurses and medics and EMTs from civil liability.
Yeah, Brotherhood has been great in that. They've really been on the forefront and really have embraced the whole church security aspect. That it's not should we do it? It's why aren't you doing it? Is the way they're looking at it with churches, because of they'd much rather protect a church from that liability issue than to have to deal with it on the back end.
Absolutely, and they're really good about it. I encourage anybody who's listening. Any insurance provider that you have, talk to them and make sure the underwriters have understand. If it's not Brotherhood Mutual, I would highly look at utilizing them or talking to your leadership at your church. They are, like Daniel said, they are on the front lines of providing protection. And one of the nice things, Daniel, with Brotherhood is when I asked them about security guard carry, by policies, I said, listen, I've had to change the policies over the years, and our training modules. And I said, would you mind looking at them? They said, absolutely. So I sent them my documents. They gave me feedback and where we could have some exposure and liability and what we may want to look at changing and stuff. And so they're really good about that. So that was one of the biggest things that I learned when it came to liability. That was one of the most important things I ever did for the ministry, was to make sure that my guys and gals who were serving and volunteering had a layer of protection. And when I was able to provide that, and the church is able to provide that, I think that goes a long way to let your folks know that you have their best interest at hand.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I really stress that in our seminar too, is that, if a church isn't providing that rider protection for the people that are representing the church in that security capacity, then you're really leaving them out to dry in a situation. They're personally responsible for whatever happens, because the church is only going to protect itself at that point.
Absolutely. And you're right. And that's what it comes down to. And, if anybody who's listening has ever been sued, whether in law enforcement or in the private sector, there's nothing fun about it. And so you want to avoid that at all costs, but understand it's going to happen and it may happen. But you want to have that protection. And same thing, Daniel, you've talked about it. U.S. Law Shield or legal defense. I have 3 different protections. The one with obviously for civil liability that Brotherhood Mutual provides, but I also have U.S. Law Shield, and I also have FOP, the Legal Defense Fund, as a retired law enforcement. So have something, guys, and that's real important to protect yourselves and your families.
Yep, great points. Anything else that comes to mind today that you'd like to share?
Sure. Standards. How high do you set your standards in church security? A big lesson that I had to learn was these guys were not law enforcement in the 90s and into the 2000s. You're providing, our qualifications used to be twice a year, the 50-round law enforcement qualification. And I realized these guys aren't law enforcement. Yeah, the guys who are Leos can have no problem with it, but the standards I was setting were too high. But I didn't want to minimize them either, because you get what you get what you put out, right? And so I think
Right.
for me, it was the firearms training and firearms and use of force, and then we got into bomb threat training and verbal de-escalation. So what comes to mind when it talks about lessons learned is um, people will reach whatever standard and how high you set the standard, but you got to be willing to come alongside them and train them. So uh, for me, it was I would rather have somebody who has a servant's heart to serve the Lord, is going to be there on time, is going to serve without missing very often, um, and is willing to be trained. And that's our standard. Is if you're willing to be trained in the process, in the interview process, we will send you through the job task analysis. We will send you through the job shadowing, shadow phase um, training, and we will get you trained up. But you've got to have a servant's heart to serve the Lord first. If not, then you're going to fail.
We just want to take a quick break here to let you know how to contact us and where to find out more about our national seminar. I see communities that may know why church security is important, but they may not be doing anything about it or don't know how to do it well. Our national seminars are for ushers, greeters, children's workers, staff, volunteers, your security teams, and other ministries in your community. We say that this is a level 1 training that is designed to help equip you to serve well in your various ministries while maintaining a safe place for people to come. Getting churches on the same or similar page when it comes to security will only make the community safer as well. The easiest way to find out more information or to contact us is to go to cv-ministries.com. There you'll find a variety of training DVDs and books, with more being developed all the time. There's also a place at the bottom of the page where you can sign up for our monthly newsletter and to be able to get more information. We would love your feedback on topics or guests that you would like to hear on future podcasts. Okay, now that we have that out of the way, let's get back to the podcast. Yep. Yeah, that's first and foremost, and that I know we really look for in our teams too, is having that servant's heart, that it's not a prideful thing to where you're now going to, say, well, I'm on the church's security team, as if you're wearing it as a badge of honor. That we're really servants in it. And the training piece, you nailed it. Like Colonel Grossman says, you're not going to rise to the occasion. You're going to sink to the level of your training in a situation. So if you're not training, then you're not going to have that discernment or that proper response when you need to.
In reference to training in general, when we had here in Calvary, Albuquerque, we had a lot of the training that I was putting on I ended up doing it myself. Here I was the training coordinator, volunteering my life to death, and I had prayed when I first became a believer. I said, Lord, use me for whatever tools I have to be able to train others and bless others. And that's and especially when I retired in 2009, it's like, use me for what you think you need me to be used for. And He's kept me in this field. I ended up going into, I still stayed on as a volunteer after I retired as a training coordinator, but I went into the private sector and managed an investigative company. We did all the civil litigation, tort claims, and I did that for about 6 years, and still kept up with the training for the church. But it kind of got to a point where I had to, that saying, Daniel, you're only as good as the people you surround yourself with, correct?
Yep.
So what I ended up doing is I became so busy and overwhelmed. Every weekend, on my weekends off, I was training people at the church, whether it was the kids ministry or the safety and security ministry, or training the teachers in our Bible Island kids children's ministry, ushers, greeters, evacuations. It was endless. And we'd go to a different satellite campus and train those folks up. And I started surrounding myself with other instructors, like-minded people, bringing on looking around and searching for volunteers that were medics or EMTs or doctors or nurses to teach the medical side of it. And I've got a great team right now of 8 instructors. These guys are awesome here at Calvary, Albuquerque. I've got 3 active duty state troopers, a couple of sheriff's deputies, and a couple of PD law enforcement that help. They're helping do what I've been doing for years, but I've been able to back off and delegate it and let them handle the training. So it's a really important lesson learned from me was don't try doing it yourself, or you and one other or 2 others. Get a team of people, get a training committee together, I also have a firearms training committee, and it's another 8 guys. A lot of them are the same folks that help with the training, but they help with the curriculum and the training and the shooting, the shoot and no shoot drills, and moving tactical engagement drills every year. So getting some folks that can come alongside and assist you is imperative to avoid burnout.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest encouragements that I give security leaders when I get emails from them and they're looking for help, or they're not sure where to go, where to start. As I tell them, I'll never claim to know it all. I have to rely on other people and other people's skills to do that training, or for me to learn from, so that I can help facilitate later on. There's a lot of guys that are leading church security teams that don't have the law enforcement background like you have, or developed everything like you have, to where they were voluntold to a degree from a ministry standpoint, and they're looking like, okay, I'm a little overwhelmed. So that's great, that you're saying that. Is that, it's just, identify and seek out those individuals and invite them in to be part of it.
Well, how long have you been a Christian, Daniel?
40 some years, 48 years.
Okay, so when you became an adult, everybody who's a believer and goes to church actively wants to find a place to plug into, right?
Right.
There's no reason in the world that you can't reach out and find those like-minded, NRA firearms instructors, or those who have a mindset to serve. They don't have no law enforcement training, no SWAT training, no EMT training, but they have a heart as a guardian to serve and protect. You can train up those folks, and those a lot of those people that don't have training but have the heart seem to be some of the best servants that I've seen in the past. Give you an example, Daniel. We had when it comes to budgets and training and staff, and there's a difference between a servant who's volunteering and then a person who's on staff, a paid staff member. I have a buddy who's also retired LEO. He's head of security at a church in Texas. And he had called me, and we've been talking on and off for the past 6 months. Hey, same questions. What are you doing with this? What are you doing for budgets? What are you doing for when you hire somebody? What about their profile and requirements for the job? And should you set them high? Should you set them low? All these questions, because when you go in from a servant volunteer to an actual staff member, now there becomes a different threshold of responsibility. And that's far and in between, because there's not a lot of churches that have actually a paid staff that are security. And when you end up talking to these folks, and it ended up everything worked out for him, and things ended up just flowing really smoothly for him. But it's just a painstaking process. And anybody out there who has questions or concerns or wants some ideas, if I can help in any way at all, I'd be happy to assist, and just give them, like you said, what lessons have I learned, and what from any mistakes that I've made. I'd be happy to share. I'm at the point, brother, where I'm not prideful when it comes to that.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And that's how we create a safer environment for all of our churches, is all of us sharing that knowledge that we have, and what have we learned through this.
Yeah, I remember the first time I spoke to Jimmy Meeks. We're talking about old police stuff, and just hearing the heart of a brother who serves is just so awesome to understand that you're not in this fight alone. And that's what everybody needs to understand, is with church security and safety, some of your congregations and your pastors may not take it serious, but don't give up. Keep fighting and doing what you can to protect the flock, because we know that line is being drawn in the sand, right? And Matthew talks about where the Lord separates the sheep and the goats, right?
Right.
We are at a point in our society right now in the world where that's happening before our eyes, and we've got to stick together and help each other, do everything we can.
And I would encourage people, and this was an email conversation I had with a friend yesterday who has a different mindset than I do. And I'm about to do a podcast with another individual. And I'm not sure whether it'll air before or after this, but we're going to talk a lot about the teams, and that we're seeing a lot of people that are discouraged, that are just calling it quits or whatever the case is. But I'm also challenging, I believe, it's scriptural, the older teach the younger. And the email that I got, the excuse that was given was, well, you've got, these, young 20, 30-year-olds that are, young newlyweds or raising families, and they're not interested in serving. Well, have you asked them? Because more than likely, like you said, there's going to be ones out there that have that warrior heart, because those of us that have been around the block for a while aren't always going to be here. So what are we doing for sustainability within our teams as well, and training those people up to serve?
And Jimmy, at the New Mexico church place of worship conference we had here in October, if you recall, Daniel, one of the things he said, he looked around the room, he said, "Hey, if you look at the ministry, there's a lot of gray hair in the audience, right? It's not that younger. We've got to start appealing and encouraging and building up the younger generation to take our spots, because we only have the fight in us till a certain age, but to start training up the next generation."
Right. Yep. Absolutely.
So the last thing I would leave is just for anybody who's looking at establishing some training standards, is to set your standards high. Your folks, the volunteers and servants, will achieve it, and they'll reach it. Whether that's the moral integrity, the physical aspect of training, just keep your standards very high. As a Christian, we serve a God who sits on the throne, and we know who wins in the end, and we know times are getting evil. So just be prepared, and stay in the fight.
Well, I love that encouragement, because that's exactly what needs to happen for all of us. It's easy to get discouraged, especially in this day and age that we're in. And churches are either open or not open, or it just looks different. And it's easy to let Satan get a foothold in that, to where we have to make sure that ourselves, as I think about that even, is that we're picking up our manna every day, so that we're not going hungry ourselves, and that we are ready for the fight.
Absolutely. Awesome.
Well, Vince, I really appreciate you taking some time and going over those things. And I know you've been on the podcast before, but if people have questions or want to get a hold of you directly, I can direct them that way, correct?
You bet. All
right. Well, I know we're recording this just before Christmas at this point, but I do want to wish you and your family a very Merry Christmas. And I just pray that this next year will be a great year, that we know God's going to do great things. We just have to, wait till he unfolds it for us to get behind him on it, or get with him on it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Daniel, for having me, and from Albuquerque to Colorado Springs. God's blessings to you, and let's always remember Jesus is the reason for the season, my friend.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
Take care.
Thank you so much for taking time to listen to this podcast. If you really enjoyed it and you found it of benefit to you, we really appreciate your feedback. There's several different ways that you can provide us feedback. One of them is to subscribe to the podcast, is to share it with others, and another is to contact us directly, particularly if you have any questions or concerns, or you want more information on how to host a seminar in your community. You can contact me directly at danielblevins@cv@heart.com, or you can go to our website. That's cv-ministries.com. Both of those will get you in the right direction. Until next time, make sure that you're out there protecting the flock with a heart of service.